Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about the top 6 books I read during lockdown. Now in the UK we're kind of coming out of like the whole really restrictive lockdown sort of procedure where we can't leave our house and all that sort of stuff. So we can now kind of get back to a normal-esque routine as such. We're still implementing like social distancing and like only going out if you really have to, etc. But we're having a bit more freedom in kind of what we can do every day at the minute. We're going back to work and all this sort of stuff. So we're on the rise. So I thought I would kind of create a list of the top books I read during my lockdown. I'm counting it as from April until the end of July. And yeah, I think that's about it. So here are the top 6 books I read during lockdown. We're going to start with one that I probably wouldn't have done if it wasn't for lockdown, and that is Reread The Kiss of Deception and then continue on with this series. This series is by Mary E. Pearson and it's a fantasy, which is very strange for me. I know I don't heavily read fantasy whatsoever, and I think the reason I love this series so much is because it's like very romance heavy. It's all about this Princess Leia who runs away on her wedding day, and as the reader you read from her perspective as well as 2 other perspectives: the assassin sent to kill her by her own father, as well as the prince that she was meant to marry, and you kind of follow her on her journey of running away and discovering who she really wants to be when she doesn't actually want to be a princess. And oh my god, I just love this series so much. Mary E. Pearson writes amazing characters. I absolutely adore all the characters in this series so much, and the reason I didn't put the rest of the series on this list is because I was trying obviously to narrow it down. But I do think that The Heart of Betrayal, which is the 2nd book in the series, is my favourite out of the entire series. But because I just adore this series so much and I binge read this entire series during lockdown, I've put The Kiss of Deception on this list instead. But I just highly recommend the entire series. It's so good. If you're not really into fantasy and you're more of a contemporary reader like me, I do recommend starting with this because it does have that sort of romance-esque feel to the book. And the characters are just amazing as well. So if you're not really into massive world building and descriptions, I highly recommend this series to start you off into the fantasy genre. Yeah, I don't know what else to say apart from I think I gave every single book a 4 or 5 stars. It's one of my favourite series of all time that is not contemporary based. And it's just so good. I'm just so glad that I decided to reread this book. This book is, or the whole series, is definitely in my top books I read during lockdown. I'm kind of doing these in month order. So I read this book in like April, like the first month. April for me reading wise in lockdown was incredible. I read about 15 books in April, including The Toll, which is like a 600-page book, including The Beauty of Darkness of this series, which is like another 700-page book. I had a great April reading month because it was literally like full-on lockdown. We couldn't leave our house, especially me being high risk. I literally couldn't leave my house unless I really had to go somewhere, and because I still live with my parents, they were doing everything that I needed to leave the house for, so I literally stayed in my house. I didn't see anyone. Books was my escapism, so I read so much in April, but this is definitely one of my favourites. So without that ramble, we're going to try and do this in like month-to-month order, but the rest of these books I all read in like June and July. May, I guess, wasn't a great reading month for me as memorable books go. So the next book I'm going to talk about is The Black Flamingo by Dean Atter. This book, oh, it's so good. If you don't know, I do feel like it's circulating the UK book community a lot more than the American or other countries' booktube communities. So if you haven't picked this book up, I highly recommend. This book is about a young boy called Michael, and you start off and witness him growing up until he goes off to university. It's all set in the UK because Dean Atter is UK based as well. And it's basically about a black queer boy who's trying to grow up and find his identity and find his real place in the world. And he really struggles with that until he goes to university and he finds the drag society. And that's where he really feels at home and feels like he belongs. And this book is all written in verse. So it's so good. And there's some really great poetry in this that stand alone from one another. One of them is, I can't find it, but I took a picture of it and I tweeted about it because it was just so impactful. And Dean Atter, his words are just incredible. To have that much of an impact with such little wording. I think it was India, from what India read, mentioned that authors that can write verse books have a way with words because they have to get a message across and impact the readers in such a short amount of time compared to a full-on novel. And Dean Atter is an incredible author, and I cannot wait to read anything he comes out with because I'm his... I don't know, it's just... It was so good, and I highly recommend you pick this book up if you haven't already. Yes, highly recommend this book for sure. The next book I'm going to talk about is one that I have an entire vlog for, so if you're interested at all by what I'm saying in this video about this book, I highly recommend you go check out that vlog. I'll leave it up above and down below for you guys. And that book is The 24-Hour Cafe by Libby Page. Now, this was the first book I did in like my 24-hour vlog series, where I read a book that's set across 24 hours, 24-Hour Cafe in 24 hours, with the timestamps of the book dictating when I can read it. I've done 2 in that series now, one with 24-Hour Cafe and one with They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera, because they both have timestamps, so I can kind of read along with the timestamps of the book, and they're so much fun to film and I cannot wait to do more of them. But this book just stood out so much to me. It's definitely one of my favourite books I've read this year. This book basically follows 2 girls who are waitresses at Stella's Cafe, a cafe that never closes. You follow Hannah and you follow Mona. They're best friends, they live together, they're like sisters, their bond is incredible. You follow Hannah for the first 12 hours in her 12-hour shift, and then you follow Mona in the second 12 hours in her 12-hour shift. And if you love characters, this book is for you because you meet so many different characters across their 24-hour journey. You see so many different walks of life come into this cafe while Hannah and Mona are both on shift, and you really get to know them as both characters together and separately, as well as all these different characters that come into the cafe. You meet a boy that is struggling to pay rent and for food. You meet this businessman who has just lost his job. You meet this gay couple who one has been deported and they're like saying goodbye in this cafe, waiting for one of them to leave. Like, the amount of characters Libby Page has put in this book is incredible, for one, and to think of so many storylines and characters for this book, but to make them all feel so real in such a little time that you get to know them. This Libby Page's writing style was just incredible, and I adored this book. I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. Definitely one of the best books I read during lockdown, and I highly recommend you pick this up if it sounds of interest to you and you love characters just as much as me, because I don't hear anyone speak about this book and I absolutely loved it. Yeah, definitely. I don't think I mentioned, but I gave the Black Flamingo a 5 out of 5 stars as well. Seeing as it's my top books of lockdown, most of them have got a 5 stars, so it's pretty self-explanatory, but I will try and remember to give you ratings from now on. And The Kiss of Deception was, of course, a 5 stars because it was a reread for me. So yeah, 24-Hour Cafe by Libby Page, highly recommend it. So that was the 3rd book in the top 6, but none of them are in any particular order because I couldn't. There's one that is at the top of my list and is literally like my favourite book I've read all year and will probably be the best book I've read in 2020. But obviously we still have like 4 months left to read, so I can't say that just yet, but I do think it might be my favourite book I read of 2020, but we shall see. But we're not talking about that one yet because I'm saving it till last. But the next book I am putting in this list is Ivy Aberdeen's Letter to the World by Ashley Herring Blake. Now this is a middle grade, and I read a fair bit of middle grade, but I'm not heavily into middle grade. I'm definitely more of a YA reader. So when I love middle grade so much, it's really good in my personal opinion because I don't read much anyway. So one really has to capture my attention for me to enjoy it. And this was definitely one of them. If you didn't know, this book follows a little girl called Ivy who knows that she's different in some way. She has this journal full of images that she's drawn of girls holding hands, and she knows that she likes girls, but she doesn't really know how to express it. So she uses this journal to do that. But one day when a tornado rips through her family's home and her journal goes missing, she has to deal with the consequences of that. And it's so precious, this book, and the characters and the family dynamic especially in this book were incredible. Like, this book heavily centers around Ivy and her family and their relationship and their dynamic as they're trying to come to terms with all the things that Ivy is experiencing, as well as losing their home. I think this was a really well done middle grade, and a middle grade that centers around a topic that isn't really well versed in the book community anyway. Female romances are not as prominent as male romances in books, in my personal opinion. And I do think having this in a middle grade is so incredible that I can't wait to read Ashley Herring Blake's other works. This book, I flew through it in a day. This is a 350-page book, and it took me a day to read. That's how attached I was to the characters. That's how attached I was to the story. Just thinking about it, I want to reread it. And when I think of my favourite books, I can remember most of the plot, and I can remember tiny details. And this is definitely one of the books that I remember a lot about, because I read a lot of books. So for me to remember little tiny details just shows how much of an impact a book's had on me personally. So yeah, this book, I think I gave it 4 stars in the end. But that's just because it was a middle grade and it wasn't my typical genre. So I think I marked it down a star because of that. But still such an incredible read and a highlight of my lockdown reading life experience situation thing. So yeah, that was book 4. Let's move on to complete end of spectrum. We're going to an adult book, and that is, can you see that? The cover is bright white, and that's The House on New Beginnings by Lucy Diamond. I have a vlog where I read this book over a weekend, so if you want to see that, I'll link it up above and down below for you guys. But this book basically follows 3 different women who are all struggling with their current life, and they all want to try and escape. So they all escape to this house on the seafront in Brighton, and they don't know of each other, but they're all struggling with their own issues. But when they all move into the same flat and house complex, they get to know each other, they get to know each other's stories, and they create this incredible bond that is second to none. I absolutely adored this book. I only gave it 4 stars, but if I did half stars, it would definitely be a 4.5, 4.75. It was so close to being a 5-star for me. And there's this one scene I remember so vividly, and I was actually like, I just remember thinking, I love these characters. They felt so real to me. Lucy Diamond did such a good job in interlacing all their stories, but never one of them felt more important than the other. But they all had their different things going on, and it was just so well interwoven that it didn't feel like 3 separate stories. It was just, I highly recommend this book. But I don't hear Lucy Diamond get spoken of in the booktube community either, and I do think she has some great pieces of fiction out there for you to explore, and I definitely recommend this one if you love characters and just want a quick chick lit sort of book to help you like just feel happy. It was less, they did have romance and romantic elements in this book, but it was definitely more about the 3 strong female leads trying to learn how to come to terms with all their life issues, and so good. Highly recommend this book as well. I highly recommend all of them, obviously, because they're my top 6 books I read during lockdown. But yeah, highly recommend this one. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, my top book during lockdown, my top book of 2020, my top book of probably one of my top books of all time. This book just hit me like no other book has ever hit me. I'll stop rambling, and that book is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. We'll take a minute's silence. This book is just incredible. This is a non-fiction memoir by George M. Johnson himself. It's about his life as he grows up in America being black and queer. And it starts off with him being 5 years old and walking home from school one day and getting bullied and his teeth knocked out by some white racists. And then you follow him and how he tries to come to terms as he grows up being in this Black community and being queer. And it's so good. His relationship with his family, especially his grandma. Each chapter he writes a letter to a different family member. This book is hard hitting. It hits some really, really sensitive topics such as sexual abuse, homophobia, racism, Blackism. Like, it hits some incredible topics, but it's so worth the read. I first read this book as a audiobook with George M. Johnson narrating it himself. He is a natural born storyteller. It's just incredible. I literally don't know what else to say about this book. Apart from this book was really, really hard to come by because I read it on audiobook, and I literally read it it was a 6-hour audiobook, and I just read it all in a day, or listened to it all in a day. I couldn't put it down. I had to know how his story kind of wrapped up and kind of what message he wanted to leave the readers on. So I listened to it in an entire day, and as soon as I finished it and he finished narrating his story, I had to buy the physical copy. Unfortunately, it was harder to come by than I anticipated. I went onto Amazon and this book was £15 with a $13 shipping fee because it wasn't in the UK yet. I just couldn't justify spending pretty much the same amount on shipping as the book. So I held off, just knowing that one day I wanted to have this physical copy myself. Until a couple of weeks later, I checked Amazon and I was like, oh my god, this book is in the UK. Shipping is free because I have Amazon Prime. Oh my god, oh my god. And I brought it straight away. It came next day and it's as pretty on the inside as it is on the outside. This book is just stunning through and through. I just highly, highly recommend it. And if you can't get a hold of the physical, I highly recommend that you read the audiobook because George M. Johnson narrates it himself. It's one of a kind, and it's definitely one of my favourite books ever. I'm actually, if you haven't seen my September TBR, I'm actually rereading this book in September, and I'm going to be annotating it and tabbing it all up with all my favourite parts, all the things that really impacted me. I just want to read it again. I can't wait to pick this one up and read it physically after having listened to it audibly. If you haven't read this book yet, you need to. Like, seriously, it was so good. So yeah, nice and quick video for you on a Sunday, but those are my top books I read during lockdown. Have we read any of the same books, or are you now interested in picking up any of the books that I've mentioned? Let's do a quick stack if I can pick them all up. Those are the top 6 books I read during lockdown. I'm going to put them down now before I drop them all. But I had, and I'm still having, such a great reading year that it was really, really hard to only pick 6. I really actually wanted to pick 5 because I feel like top 5 kind of rings a bit better. Top 5 books I read during lockdown, but I couldn't narrow it down anymore. These are definitely some of my favourite books I've read in the entire year. So you'll probably be hearing about them again soon in a couple of months when I do my wrap-ups for the year, etc. But I couldn't not shout about them now because I absolutely adored them. And there's definitely a few there that I don't think you might have heard of, such as The House of New Beginnings by Lucy Diamond and The 24-Hour Cafe by Libby Page. Both I highly, highly recommend you to get your hands on. So yeah, I think that kind of wraps up for this Sunday afternoon video. Anyway, I'm rambling. If you liked this video, I would really, really appreciate your support by liking, commenting, subscribing, etc. Just watching these videos, it means an absolute world to me. I've actually reached a pretty cool milestone. Last time I uploaded a video, it was pre-recorded, so I didn't get to thank you guys, but I've recently passed 250 subscribers and I'm now closer to 300. Which is incredible. So if you want to help me reach my next milestone of 300 subscribers, don't be shy to join this family and follow along on my bookish journey. I'm super, super excited to produce more content for you guys. So I just want to thank every single one of you for liking, commenting, subscribing. It means the absolute world, and I cannot believe I'm close to another milestone. It's just crazy, and being on BookTube just makes me so, so happy, and I love doing videos and editing it and all that sort of stuff for you. So yeah, still rambling. I'm still rambling. But I'm going to leave it here. I really, really hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked what you saw and liked what you heard, please give this video a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.